Well, my work here is coming to an end pretty soon. Carol and I would like to move to Minnesota to be closer to our children and grandchildren. And that leaves us with this big house in Indianapolis that needs to be jettisoned. We need to get rid of it. So all of my weekends that I go home have been mostly spent sitting in the basement going through box after box after box of the detritus of 34 years of marriage. And I have to tell you that I have never felt so burdened by my possessions. The things that we own, they just weigh so heavy on me because here's the deal. I'm eager to go meet those new people whose pastor I'm going to be. I'm eager to go be the grandfather who only lives 20 minutes away and can come over and babysit anytime they want me to. I am eager to start this new life, and it's just like all the stuff in the basement, and in Jonah's room, in Levi's room, in our room, is just like a ball and chain around my spirit. That's the nature of the things that we possess. In a very real way, they possess us. And I don't know, maybe it's a thing that you become more and more aware of as you get older. Because I don't remember feeling that way about the things. It's that even the stuff that, reminds me of some happy time with our kids or something, even that stuff feels heavy to me. Not to mention the stuff we bought and don't use anymore and can't bear to throw away, and so we put them in a box and put them in our basement. Or the things that we created and made. The things that somebody we loved made, and so we don't feel like we can get rid of it because Grandma made it. And all that stuff, it's just weighing us down. I say jokingly, in case John Flickinger is listening, I wish that one day when we were all away at work, God would just strike the place with lightning and we could be done with it. Things are not, in and of themselves, life-giving. They're a burden to us. They own us as much as we own them. And so it's kind of surprising that we tend to take that relationship of subject to object, of person to thing, and use it as the paradigm for shaping so many of our relationships that aren't with things and possessions. We get in a lot of trouble as human beings when we treat each other as though they were things, as though the feelings and the experiences and the sufferings of the people around us weren't really relevant because we're in charge. We own it. We can do what we want. And I would say about 99% of the evil in the world comes from one person treating another person like property. And when we did that literally, when we owned people in this country, we set in motion relationships and dynamics that even though that institution of slavery has been abolished for over 150 years, the consequences of our having treated others in that way continue to haunt us in our current day. There are the root consequences of treating things that aren't things as though they were things are huge. Take a minute. I'm going to shut up. Listen to what you can hear. Take a deep breath and smell what you can smell. Look around at the trees and the grass and these other people. This is the creation into which God created us and with which God created us. Do you feel your blood pressure going down? Do you feel your breathing relaxing? Do you feel your heart slowing down just a little bit? Do you feel the stress kind of seeping out at you as you feel yourself existing in this awesome splendor and wonder? How would we live if we didn't have this to experience? These smells, these sounds, these sights. And yet we are tempted and we fall victim to the temptation. We succumb to the temptation of treating all of this as if it were a thing that we could plunder. As if it was a thing, a piece of property, something that belonged to us, that was simply here for us to consume, to use up, and to discard. We dig into the ground and we pull out the resources that we want. We bulldoze the tops of mountains and suck the coal out of it, and the toxins that are released by that haphazard process soaks into lakes and streams and creeks and poisons the drinking water. We need the oil that can only be brought to the surface by a thing called fracking, and it is, in fact, polluting people's drinking water. But we own it. It's ours. We can do it. We're the only animals, we're the only creatures who foul our own nest. Smell what you can smell. Hear what you can hear. See what you can see. Some people defend the notion of treating the creation as though it were a thing to be used, a thing to be abused, a thing to be raped. By looking at that first chapter of Genesis, God said that we had dominion over this creation. And the assumption is that dominion means that we own it, that it's ours, that we're the boss, that we can make the decisions. God doesn't say you can be the tyrant over the creation or the tyrant over one another. I remember being very surprised reading novels about the Napoleonic Wars, and that the British, who were still the subjects of King George III, who we tossed out of here because we called him a tyrant, were defending King George against Napoleon, whom they referred to as the tyrant. How could the people who served, who we call the tyrant, call him a tyrant? The reason is because a tyrant is someone who isn't constrained. A tyrant owns the people over which he or she rules. Their king was a constitutional monarch. He was king in the context of laws. He was the king in relationship to his subjects. Which meant that not only did they have responsibility to be obedient to him, but he had responsibilities for their well-being. And that has been the definition of a ruler throughout most of human history. Tyrants do come and go, but the majority of human history has been, human beings have been ruled by persons who understood themselves to be in a covenant relationship. People owed obedience to the ruler, but the rulers owed something to those that they ruled. The context is in a relationship. The Latin word for ruler is dominus. It is the root of the English word dominion. God, in the first chapter of Genesis, gives human beings dominion over the creation, which means that we are given the opportunity and the privilege and the responsibility of ruling over the creation. But that word has its meaning in the context of this reality that the ruler must be obeyed and has authority to make decisions, but must take into account the well-being of those who are ruled or that which is ruled. Dominion is not the relationship of a person to a thing. Dominion is the relationship between one person and other persons. If you listen carefully to what Alice read to us this morning about our relationship to the creation of which we are a part, God, before what she read, God creates the sun and the moon, the light and the darkness, the earth and the waters. And every day God creates a different aspect of creation, and every day of creation God gets finished. And at the end of the day, God looks at what God has made and says, it's good. In fact, the only day he doesn't say that is Monday, and I sort of get that. The first time he says that something isn't good is when he looks at Adam and says, it's not good for the man to be alone. That's the first thing that isn't good in this creation. So this thing which God has created and given us dominion over is a thing that God finds beautiful, is a thing that God calls good. It is a thing that God values. And when he says, I give you dominion over the fish of the sea and the animals of the land and the birds of the air, when he says, I give you dominion over the creation which I think is good, what does he mean by dominion? What is the model for dominion? And it can't really be anything other than God's relationship to us and God's relationship to the creation. God made it. God thinks it is beautiful. God thinks it is a gift to give to his human creatures. That's the meaning of dominion. It is to create. It's to appreciate. It's to protect. That's the model for dominion. God models for us what our relationship to his creation must be. And it makes certain aspects of our relationship to the creation very clear. If we are disrespectful of a thing that God says is good, if we actively participate in the destruction of a thing that God thinks is good, what does that say about our relationship to God? Can we be disrespectful and destructive of a thing that God thinks is good without being disrespectful and destructive of our relationship with God? Can we? I don't see how. We human beings, one of the ways I think that we human beings kind of push this whole thing about our relationship with the creation to the side is by we focus on an understanding of salvation, which is not the only understanding of creation in Scripture. The understanding of salvation is that we have these bodies, but they're just shells. And eventually they wear out, or they get damaged, or something, or they get sick, and they fall away, and then we have this spiritual being within us that emerges, and then we go off into some ethereal, non-physical place to be with God, and it's really awesome. Only that's not the only way that Scripture thinks about our salvation. And the passage from Romans is one of the places where Paul explores a different, more embodied understanding of our future life. And he says the most amazing thing. He says, I can't imagine how the current suffering that we're suffering can possibly even compare to the glory that God is bringing about, that we are about to see revealed. And then he says this amazing thing about the creation. The creation itself is groaning inwardly in anticipation to see what God is about to do with the children of God. That it was subjected somehow to futility, that is to say, decay and death and so forth, but that's not the creation's final end. But that somehow our salvation, our redemption, our reconciliation to God is not merely a spiritual thing, but is an embodied thing. I have this wonderful argument that I have all the time with my son Jonah about the line in the Apostles' Creed that says, I believe in the resurrection of the body. And that used to be one of the lines that I would stand in church and I would cross my fingers behind my back when I said that one. And then, uncross my fingers when I got to the next line. But as I get older, I love that line best of all. The idea that we are not necessarily saved as disembodied spirits, but that we are saved as embodied spirits. The Hebrews understood that what it meant to be a human being was the intersection of this with this. Because Adam comes to life and becomes a human being when God lays the divine lips on his muddy face and blows the Spirit of God, the breath of God, the wind of God into. In fact, the Hebrew word for soul is nephesh, which is related to the Hebrew word for neck or throat. The place where spirit and breath enter into the body. So we are a part of creation, and creation is that which we were created into. It is, in fact, like a sibling to us, and that when God acts to redeem and reconcile us, it is not apart somehow from this beautiful thing which God has created and said is good. What that suggests to me is not only is this creation a part of our environment as we are created, which God says is good, but that it is with us through our existence as human beings, and it is with us when God comes to gather us home. And that reality lays certain responsibilities on us for caring for this planet. I know it's a small thing, but when I'm in a restaurant, I've started giving the straws back to the server and drinking my water just, like a grown-up. Because there is a patch in the middle of the Pacific Ocean the size of the state of Texas, which is nothing but plastic. Straws and those little harnesses that keep six-packs together, and plastic bags and plastic water bottles. The size of the state of Texas, you can see it from space. This thing which God has created and called good, and we use it like a wastebasket or a toilet. How can we worship and glorify God by desecrating what He said was good? By desecrating the people and the creation that God's intention is to redeem and reconcile at the end? Are we justified to treat the earth in the way that we do, just so that we can have a plastic straw over supper? Just so that it's easier to carry our six-pack home in a plastic bag? I think it's incumbent upon us, as we sit in this beautiful sanctuary and listen to the beautiful sounds and look at the beautiful sights and inhale the clean water, to ask ourselves, what is it that justifies our mistreatment of this beauty? Is it so important that we drink out through a straw? Is it so important that we not have to wash diapers? Is it so important that we keep our six-packs together? Or might we put ourselves out a little more and think about how we worship God and glorify God through our relationship with this thing which is not a thing? It's not a person. Creation is not a person, but it's not a thing. Animals are not people. You read on Facebook a lot, about my fur babies, and he's my child or she's my baby, and and I'm uncomfortable with that language because, in fact, animals, even the pets that we love so much, are not people. They're animals. And that means that we have a particular responsibility, a particular kind of relationship with them, which is not the relationship of a person to a thing. Because your beloved pet is not a thing. It's your friend. It's your responsibility. I can't take my grandma out and take her to the doctor and have her put down. And I don't have a responsibility to do that. I can take my beloved pet to the vet and have him put down. Not only can I, but at a certain point it becomes my responsibility to. The creation is not a thing. The creation is not a person. It is a particular category that God has given us to have dominion over, to exercise authority over in the context of a loving relationship. Do we have the right to eat animals? Of course. Do we have the right to make them suffer as we prepare them to be eaten? Of course we do not. Because we have a relationship that includes a responsibility to the animals, to the plants, to the trees, to the atmosphere, to the climate. It's what it means to have been given dominion by God. Thanks be to God. So,